So, welcome to How to Manage Your Boss. Well, this title was actually suggested by Jan. You will notice from the photograph, the reason is that I've got it up there at all is quite apart from the fact that I'm really missing the snow and everybody else seems to be skiing except for me this year, so that pains me as a little boy from Switzerland. But also Jan decided that he was far too busy to come on the webinar this morning, having actually won a prize for suggesting today's title, but as you can see, he had better things to do, and this is a photograph he sent me yesterday of the slopes. Looks like somewhere in Italy. He's obviously had a cup of coffee with a colleague, and somebody's even has been drinking some ski juice, as you see from the glass in the middle, to try and improve their performance. Well, having tried that many times, I can tell you it doesn't work. But anyway, enjoy the snow, Jan, and thank you for the excellent topic. So let me start out now by asking you a question about where you are now in terms of the tools that you have or the way that you think about the way you manage your boss. So I'm going to put up a poll and get your response to it. So here it is. I have worked out what the most important factors are in managing my bosses. So you could say, not at all, I take it as it comes, or I mostly muddle through somehow, or sort of, sometimes it's clear, sometimes it's not, or I often find a way to handle them eventually, or if you're supremely confident, I have a framework and I have some personal rules for how I manage my bosses. So, okay, the votes are coming in. So the clear favourite is sort of, sometimes it's clear, sometimes it's not. We have a few very confident coves. I have a framework and some personal rules. I'd actually really like to hear one or two of those. So if you are prepared to share, that would be superb. 13% of you don't have a strategy at all. Take it as it comes. So that's where you are now. I'm going to ask you the same question at the end and see how it's gone. So let's get on with the main meat of it now. One of the things that struck me about managing a boss is that it does have some parallels to the way in which animals behave. It struck me, and the thought here is that the dogs are very much crowd pleasers, and cats tend to do their own thing. They're very independent, probably rather selfish, truth be told. But they're both rather troublesome ways of handling the boss. Crowd pleasers, or people who are always out to please their boss, run into trouble because they get overloaded. Cats, who tend to do their own thing, tend to get ignored by the boss, or are just a bit too independent, a bit too hard to handle. So is there something in between? Now, being human beings, we can actually choose. So what I'm asking you to think about now is, how do you want it to be? You can make a conscious decision, like any strategy, that once you've made a decision, once you've got a way of doing things, like that 4% of people, then you don't have to worry about making piecemeal decisions along the way. So one of the things you can decide up front is how much you're prepared to actually be active in the relationship. Are you prepared to really make decisions about, or how prepared are you to make decisions to push it, to approach your boss, to make decisions, to make suggestions, to do all the things that I'm going to just explain in the next few minutes? How active, on a scale of 1 to 10, and give yourself a number, do I want to be in this relationship? Now, if you've just started a job, that's fine. If you've been in a job already for a long while, there is no reason why you can't re-establish or press a reset button or clarify the relationship that you have with your current boss. So that's the first thing. How active do I want to be? The second thing is to consider is, how much do I really know about my boss already? Do I know that they are a diminutive, a small mousy sort of person who sticks around in the background? Or are they somebody who I really have to watch out for and who could cause me some damage? And how much of what I know about my boss is fact and how much is fiction? Have I been listening to stories? And particularly if you're new in the organisation, are you believing some sort of folklore about the person you're working with? So what do you really know about them? And have you checked it out? It's amazing how long people keep on believing stuff that's happened and is being created by one person. And then, of course, what do you want? What are you prepared to go for? And maybe that's really, that's very much about you. How much freedom do I want? How much steer do I want? How much do I want to have to push hard? So you can set things up here. There's some very simple things that you can do. You can actually ask your boss what they want, and then you can sort of pitch your own stall alongside that. So what I would do is to choose the things that are really important to you. It might be autonomy. It might be input, how much input you think he might want to things or she might want to things, and ask them to tell you on a scale of 1 to 10. So you can say, boss, you're my new boss, blah, blah, blah. How much autonomy are you prepared to give me on a scale of 1 to 10? How much input will you allow me on a scale of 1 to 10 on important issues? How much input do you want into my work? And so on. Giving people numbers, or giving them the opportunity to give us numbers, is a really helpful way of gauging where they are on this rather sort of mushy stuff. So here's the second thing. Problems. So this is the second of the 5 areas I wanted to cover with you. So this is problems. Now, sometimes people, I suppose what people complain about very often for me is that their boss is unpredictable. They will come in and storm around or dump unnecessary and most importantly unpredictable amounts of work and at weird times on them. Now, I think this is partly our fault. If we're getting out of the blue requests from our boss, it's probably because we're not in sufficient touch. So the way I look at it is this. If my boss has something on their minds, I want to know it before anybody else, maybe even before they do. And that means actually taking the time to listen to them to an extraordinary degree. Now, what does this sound like? I can go up to my boss and actually make, I notice what's going on with them. They've got a long face one morning. And I think, okay, well, I can actually say something about this without invading their space and without asking them, how are you feeling? Because that's probably the most useless question we can ask anybody. How are you feeling this morning? Well, it's really obvious. And if we ask somebody how they're feeling, they're highly unlikely to tell us. But if I'm to say something like, you don't look very happy this morning, Barry. Jane, you seem worried about something. You look less than happy this morning, John. Those are statements which are very easy to respond to with the truth, and that's what we want. Why would I go to the trouble to do this? Well, so that I get fewer surprises. I can do something ahead of time. That awful word, I'm not going to use it. Proactive. Okay, there we go. So I can do something before I have to, and I've got more time to act. And of course, I get less stuff coming to me from above. So that's why it's worth making your problem my problem, because I want to know what's going on. So here's the second area. Perfection. Now, people often these days complain of being overloaded, and there are certain organisations where this is more the case than others. but there are things that we do that actually help to create or promote this situation, and I want to explain those in the next couple of minutes. The sum total, or the sum effect, is that we end up creating Rolls Royces. And what this means is that we are constantly overloading ourselves and giving ourselves stuff that is really, really unnecessary. It's constantly raising the bar and really creating work not just for us, but for our teams. But there is something that we do along the way which puts us in this position. And here are the three words that jump into my head. We tend to do things better than they need to be done. We get into the habit of delivering them sooner. In other words, we think, well, I've got this thing, I'm just going to do it a bit better. I'm just going to put this on. I'm just going to add this chart. I'm just going to proofread it one more time. I'm just going to add this, which wasn't asked for. And you know what? I think I've got an extra. I've got an extra morning here, which I was going to use for something else. But if I finish that now, then I can get it in a day early. And maybe if I also put in this report with it, then it'll be even better. So what we're doing is constantly lining up the pressure for ourselves for the next time. So the next time the expectations of our boss are so much higher. But even if their expectations don't change, and they probably will, ours already have. The damage is already done. So unless you are absolutely asked to turn in that superlative for public consumption piece of work, a rule that you might think of applying, at least in your head, is 80%. If you finish something and you're pleased with it, and you maybe get a colleague to check it, then leave it alone. And that takes a lot of self-discipline to simply stop when something is finished and put it to one side. So that's what I think of as our perils of perfection. Now, here's one that's turned up quite a bit. It turns up a lot in the world of finance, where people are competing against their colleagues, also in sales. There's a great temptation in both those areas to live the dog-eat-dog mentality. And it's, I fortunately don't have to. But it's possible to actually extract oneself out of that. One of the things that makes it so prevalent is that bosses, that includes you and me, if you are watching this and you have a team, you will be doing this as well. Bosses tend to notice the very visible stuff. We tend not to be great at paying attention to the people who get on with things quietly, but without being seen. In my early days of having a team, I was in the army, I was 18, I had a platoon of, God forbid, 93 poor soldiers. I had a platoon sergeant and a corporal, and I had 93 people to get to know. Now, as if getting to know their names wasn't enough, I was expected to know everything about them. Who had a girlfriend, who had a boyfriend, who had a baby, whose parents were alcoholics, etc., 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 etc. And it was very easy to get to know the troublemakers because they were being marched in front of me every week. It was very easy to get to know the really nice ones because they would come up and, say, "Good morning, sir," and they'd throw up a nice salute, and they always looked smart on parade. But that middle 55 or 60% were a nightmare for me. And it took a long while before I found out who they were and what they did. And so it is the same in corporate life. So if we want to be good at looking after people, or if we want to be noticeable to our bosses, who are probably prone to the same problems that we have of allowing people to disappear, there are some things that we can do to make sure that we don't disappear. So the first thing is to not get caught up with doing things which are very noticeable, like buying next year's Christmas tree or this year's Christmas tree, just because it's a 50% off job. That might be a very visible task, but it's ludicrous. Now, I know I've chosen a really silly example, but there are people around who do stuff just to get noticed. You don't have to be one of them. There are much more interesting things you can do to stay visible whilst you're doing the important but invisible stuff. So one of the things is snippets. Backtrack a second. The important thing is to make sure that you are actually choosing the important stuff, not buying Christmas trees, but finding out what your boss really wants to do or what is on their minds. Now, we've already had a think about, how you might find that out. This business of listening. So you should know what's on their mind. You should know what keeps them awake at night. So once you've set to work on this, there are some things that you can do to stay visible. One is to give little bits and pieces, snippets, as I call them. So this might be early data on the study that's happening. It might be that you have some data or something to report on response rates. It might be that you can give the boss a section of the document that you've put together, or a project scope. There is always stuff, interesting and brief stuff, that you can pass up to get the people who are just sitting there waiting for the result something interesting to do. It's getting them involved, but not burying them in detail. So that's the first thing, that giving people snippets, people who really don't want to see a lot of stuff, but they need to know something's happening. Now, they're not going to ask for this stuff. You're going to have to volunteer it and become a bit of a fanatic for it, looking out as you're doing a piece of work for things. Ooh, that's an interesting thing. I'm going to package that up for a few minutes and I'm going to send it out. Or better still, I'm going to walk down the corridor. Now, why is this worth doing? It's worth doing because it's going to create interest. It's going to be reassuring that you are onto it, that you're actually producing stuff. The designers who work for us, two guys called We Are Goat, hilarious pair of guys, but they, particularly when they're late with something, they will always tell us a week in advance when something's going to be late, or they give us stuff to look at. And consequently, I never hassle them for stuff because I always know they're onto it. Giving people snippets of stuff also allows for some course correction. So you are unlikely to finish a piece of work only to be told that it needs some major changes. You're going to find out along the way. So it's a time saver for you as well. Now, one thing I've heard of a number of times in coaching sessions, and it's just this week was a case in point. Somebody who I've just been working with is thinking of leaving their organization. They've been there for a number of years. They're very, very successful with clients. And it's a really interesting, sort of discreet sort of company that they operate. But one thing that they noticed is that they don't have a very good network outside their clients base. They're being kept so busy by their organization that they don't really know where to go next. And they're pretty sure that they want to leave the organization. So what this means is that they are going to have to get out there. So what I'm suggesting to you is that there will always be people who are interested in what you're doing, but you have to identify them, and you might have to ask your boss who the other stakeholders are. What I suggest to you is that you find out who these other stakeholders are from your boss and put it upon yourself. Make it your business to reach out to them. Do not rely on your boss to do it for you. She or he do not have time for that. You have to be in charge of your own public relations. There is absolutely no reason to fall behind just because the work that you're doing is invisible, even though it's important. So that's the piece about staying on the radar. Now, here's something which we have run a webinar, a whole webinar on, and that's feedback. And I've called this feedback without fatalities, because very often people are nervous about passing feedback up the line. Not surprisingly, maybe. Giving your boss negative feedback would seem to be a really precarious thing to do. But if you think about it, and if you are a boss, and most of you will be, even if you have 2 or 3 people in your group, you will know that it's really difficult to stay in touch with what's really going on. You really depend on the people around you to tell you the truth, about your behaviour and how it comes across, to tell you the truth about your ideas and your thinking, to tell you the truth about, well, even things like strategy, and when it's just not going to work. As supervisors and bosses, we utterly depend on the people around us to tell us the truth. You can do the same for the person that you work for. And there is a particular way that you can do this without being rebuffed. I'm not suggesting you just wade in there and say, I've got some feedback for you. There is a little routine that I'd ask you to consider. The first thing I suggest you do is to ask permission. And this is as simple as saying something like, would you welcome some feedback on this strategy? Or would you welcome some feedback on this or that? Or how that team meeting came across? Or is it all done and dusted? Are you happy with the way it is? So give the person the option to step back. Very, very few people will say, no thanks, I've got it covered. And if they do, that's fine. You've been warned. Just step back on that one. The second thing is to give non-judgmental feedback. So what does this look and sound like? Well, I'm not going to write it up on the screen, but I'm going to tell you about it. The first thing that we need to say when we're being non-judgmental or giving some non-judgmental feedback is, firstly, how I feel. I was surprised, I was disappointed, I was worried, I was taken aback, I am uneasy. So we name the feeling. The second element of non-judgmental feedback is the what about. And we give a very specific what about. I'm nervous about giving out all the budget figures during the town hall meeting. And thirdly, why? Because I think people are going to get confused, or because I think it's going to cause panic. So the way to give non-judgmental feedback is to talk about my feeling and the what about and why I feel like that. That way, my boss gets totally left alone. She or he can decide for themselves whether they want to take it or not. It is Paul Furey's very personal opinion. So that's how I suggest you experiment with giving feedback. And that is one thing that we do a lot on all our programs. We stick to that particular routine. And we know from 25 years of doing this now that really has a tremendous impact and causes no damage at all. It's very hard to get irritated with somebody who is having a feeling. But the permission is important to start with. And here's the thing that people find the hardest of all, is to avoid giving advice. No advice, even if it's invited. They'd have to be begging to get it out of me. So feedback that has advice or that starts with a question or anything like that, why don't you, or had you thought about, that is probably going to get a bad reaction. It certainly would from me. So the thing I'd leave you with on this feedback is that judgments and uncalled for helpful suggestions cause more messenger fatalities than anything else. So my suggestion is stay away from value judgments and stay away from advice. Okay, so much for feedback. The final area I want to cover off with you this morning is about complaints. People are often surprised that their complaints aren't paid more attention to. Yes, I suppose whistleblowing is one type of complaint, but there's one case study that has stuck in my head for a long time, and that is somebody I worked with, a really nice chap, about 3 or 4 years ago. He worked in a fund manager. He was doing really well. He's obviously highly intelligent, knew his stuff. But where I took up the story with him is that he wanted promotion, and he kept on asking his boss for promotion. And each time he was disappointed, and it started to sound like I suppose it was a complaint. He'd cite his work, and he'd say that how many other people were getting promoted and he wasn't. And all in all, he didn't get promoted in the end, and in fact he left the company. But there's something about how we pass news to the top that will either be rendered and understood as a complaint, or it will be taken as helpful communication. So actually how we pass the message on and which bits of the message we choose to report and how we report those messages is really important. So the difference I see in the scenario that these two are taking part in is marked. The point is that these two people have decided to go about it a completely different way. This person is just complaining that he doesn't like the way things are around here because it stinks. This person has gone to find out what the problem is and is going to the trouble of explaining it. And I'm going to go into a little bit more of that for the next couple of seconds. There are 3 things that we can do, I think, just at a very common sense human level, to change complaint making or complaining into some positive action, which actually will improve, enhance the relationship that we have with our bosses. I think the first step is to try to sort it out ourselves. If you're on this call, the chances are that you've got some sort of ability, rank, status, experience to sort things out. A lot of things I'm grappling for the word now. Escalated, there we go. The word escalation, when was that invented? We escalate so many things. So before you next escalate a problem that you think, I'm just going to get rid of this one, or the boss should really do something about this, really think, is there something that you could be doing? Interesting case study here. I'm doing some work over in the US for a company, a bunch of really intelligent people, absolute delight to work with. But one of them was getting some verbal off another person in the company. That person goes to one of his colleagues and says, you really need to put a note out to everybody to say that swearing is unacceptable in the workplace. And fortunately, the person who he was telling, his boss actually said, no, actually, I think what you need to do, John, is to go and talk to him and tell him to stop swearing at you. So the first thing, try and sort it out. The second possibility is the FYI. I am coming to tell you that I'm just about to deal with a situation and I just need you to give me the okay. And so here is the red button. All you need to do is to press the red button and it will be sorted. Would you like to do that, please? And the third thing we can do is to start to sort something out and then to take our boss half a problem. Half a problem might even constitute a problem that you've really understood and you know what's happening. And you can explain the different components and maybe even give some suggestions. But presenting a boss with half a problem, like the guy with the green telephone here, is the way to go, even if you have to escalate something. Now, why would you want to go to that trouble? Well, if you think about your boss's position, you are not in a position to help them with the instant death problems that they might receive from above. But what you are in a position to do is to deal with the quicksand of problems that is approaching them for a slow death from underneath. So you could become someone really useful to your boss to help them to stop this stuff bubbling up from underneath them. Okay, so that's what I have for you this morning. And just to summarise here are the main bits. You can decide to do stuff instead of having it done to you. You can give rather than take leadership. You can give your own. You can speak up, choose to speak up instead of laying low, which is sometimes the safest option. You can decide to act up instead of acting down and expecting your boss to do the same. None of us like interfering bosses. There is a lot we can do to prevent that. And here, maybe more than anything that you've seen this morning, you might be left with the impression that you're going to have to take a chance sometimes. But if you ask for permission, it's not nearly as chancy as it seems. I think we need to act consciously to exercise our choices. And I think if I look at my own relationships with clients, a lot of that rank structure that happens between us, I create. I'm the one who puts myself in the subservient position. I'm the one who makes myself nervous, thinking that they might not like what I'm doing or that it's not good enough. And then I start creating these Rolls Royces and all that other nonsense that I was talking about earlier. And actually, the people we work for really want an equal more than anything, most of the time. Okay, I'll do a couple of questions first, and then we'll have the exit poll, and then any remaining questions I will leave until injury time. A couple of questions that came in even before the webinar began. We received these yesterday. One from Katie. They're quite long, but I think they're really worth reading out. Katie wrote, "Hi, I have experienced a few bosses who are very aggressive towards me in their style. They think loud, not listening, bullying me, my team, and undermining, marking very low, focusing on blame, minor defects rather than big picture issues. I've stood up to these people and let them know where I am not happy with their behaviour and how it affects me. I told them how I'd like to work with them. I'm still not getting the marks that I want. The relationship still doesn't improve. The working relationship is not as relaxed and as easy as I would normally have with other senior work colleagues. What should I do better next time?" Well, I think the fact that you're asking yourself the question, Katie, is laudable. I had a couple of thoughts for you. Now, of course, I'm not you. I'm not there. But here's what it set me thinking. I'm wondering if you've told them, these people, particularly the ones who give you a hard time, when they have done something that you did like, because it's really difficult sometimes as a boss to get it right. And if we're not very good at it, there is going to be very little good news from the troops. So getting a piece of good news from the troops can be really encouraging, and it can warm people up. So that's the first thing, positive feedback going upwards. The second thing is that when people are acting antisocially, they're being really nasty, there's always a reason. However, it's very difficult to want to pay attention to that reason because they're not being nice. And it's very difficult to care about someone who's not being nice, never mind to want to really pay them attention, to want to show them any empathy. But that's what I believe we must do. So if you look upon this person or these people, Katie, as children who are kicking off, and rather than tell them to get back in the supermarket trolley or to rip the sweets out of their hands, maybe you might bring yourself to experiment with trying to find out what's going on for them by empathising with them. Doug, you don't seem at all happy with this work. It sounds like it really bothers you. And just try and help them to unpack. Positive feedback and listening. That sounds like a very tough route, Katie, but happy to talk more about that one offline if you want to. Another one here from Nikki. One specific challenge I have in my current role is that my boss and support team are all in Vancouver, so I have an 8-hour comms black hole every day. I end up working nights a lot. Not great. The project team is struggling to deliver some of their large complex deals, and then they're letting a lot of balls drop. How do I get their focus? So in terms of the comms black hole, that's very difficult to stay on the radar. My humble suggestion would be is to actually email the 2 or 3 things that you want to talk about when you're clear and you know what's going on. And so you're totally compos mentis, and then phone them up towards the end of your day and just get the answers to the questions that you wrote to them. In terms of worrying about, Nikki also describes worrying about always coming across as the complainer to her boss because she's often reporting on a team that's not delivering. You can actually tell him that you're worried about coming across as a complainer and that it's not your intention. If you have some ideas, if he's up for them, about how these problems might be solved, then that's that could also help. But again, Nikki, happy to talk about that one. Time differences are extremely difficult, as nobody's quite ever at their best when you're dealing across large time differences. So that the last one there is tell him how you feel about complaining and that you don't want to be doing it. Okay. So I know we have another question here from Natalie. I also see that it's almost a 10:15. So Natalie, don't go away. I do want to answer your question. Natalie's question is, I'd like to hear, if possible, about managing the boss who is not around very much. That's where we ended up. So the boss who's not around very much. It's 10:15 now. If you want to hear my thoughts on managing bosses who aren't around very much, and I'm on a project in the US at the moment where the CEO is here in the UK and trying to set up a company over in the US. I'm going to come back to that. I just want to do the final poll and say goodbye to everybody who has to dash away immediately. So without further ado, let's put up the second, the exit poll, as it were, and get your response now. So I have worked out what the most important factors are in managing my bosses. Have you changed your thinking on this at all? Are you still, no, not at all. I think I'll still have to take it as it comes. Or would you vote, I will still mostly muddle through. I will be able to sort it out sometimes. Maybe sometimes it will be clear. Do you think you will find a way to handle them often? Or do you think, wow, actually, no, I now have a bit of a framework to go to. So votes are coming in. And there are the results. Well, we've had a big surge, and I think I will now often find a way to handle them. And a very big, a 20% surge, and I now have a framework, some personal rules to consider. That's good enough for me. Fantastic. I'm delighted about that. If you have to dash off now, it's been a joy having you. Thank you so much for coming along. We've had a stupendous crowd. As I said, many of you new to this, so thanks for joining. Thank you for putting half an hour, 45 minutes of your Friday morning our way. Really look forward to staying in touch with you. And so I'll say goodbye if you must go immediately. And if you can stay on. And I'm going to spend a couple of minutes on this distance working piece, which seems to be increasingly prevalent. So Natalie, working at a distance. So here's something fresh from the front, as it were. And this is, as I said, a problem that I'm encountering on one of these projects at first hand, both as someone who is working with the CEO of the company. So the CEO is in this country, and the whole company is in the States. So what they're finding is that they don't get a large enough slice of his time. And as being the consultant who was hired from over here to work over there, I find it really difficult to be, how should I put it, present or giving my best. So by the time they're waking up, it's 9 o'clock there, 4 o'clock here, and I really struggle to give them some good stuff. So what I have had to start doing is there's a couple of things. One is to avoid communicating by email. And one of the things that the boss of the company, the CEO, does, smashing bloke, really, really nice, heart's totally in the right place, he's totally devoted to the people out there and their success, but he's also running a company over here. One of the things that I've asked him to give up, and they have asked him to give up, and I now make sure that I don't do myself, is send them lots of big emails. The big emails, he thinks, do everything. but they don't, and actually just bombard his people. So as somebody who is working for a boss who isn't there, if that is one of the problems, then, try to get some telephone time and restrict the email traffic. And that, of course, goes for you as well, Natalie. Try not to communicate with email, even though it means some really horrible times. Maybe there's once during the week where you work a really weird schedule, and maybe she or he can too. And I think that's probably the biggest one, is not allowing him to guess what's going on with you, and you not falling into guessing what's happening with him. And if there's a way of half communicating, in other words, exchanging guesses but not real feelings, that's email. Phone is 1,000 times better. If you can do a VC, a video conference, so much the better. Skype is much better than it used to be, but cut out the email. Hopefully that is somewhat satisfactory. Let me know if it's not, Natalie. I think that has dealt with all the questions. So I'll say to the rest of you, thank you so much for joining this morning. Have a terrific weekend. Bye-bye.